Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, let me start off by saying this is my first video. Well, the first video where I'll be commenting on anything with my own voice, so I'll probably be stuttering quite a lot. I'll probably be stumbling here and there. I don't do this on script, I'm doing this entirely spontaneously. The reason for this is because Anita Sarkeesian has once again released something that is utter bogus, and I wanted to at least comment on this. Now, before I'm even getting into the video, the first thing I notice, ratings have been disabled, and no comments. This should surprise no one. She is absolutely terrified of any kind of peer review, she's absolutely terrified of any kind of public polling of the quality of her work. She doesn't want others to know at a glance that her work is absolutely terrible. With that said, let's begin with positive female characters in video games.
The hero of the 2011 pixelated adventure game Sword and Sorcery is a brave adventurer known only as the Scythian, and the game tells a story of her quest to collect the 3 pieces of the Golden Trigon. Now, if a quest to collect pieces of a magical triangular artifact sounds familiar, that's no accident. Sword and Sorcery's Trigon is a clear reference to the Triforce of the Legend of Zelda games, and Link's recurring quest to collect pieces of the Triforce is perhaps the most famous heroic quest in the history of fantasy adventure games.
Let me stop her right there. The recurring quest to collect the pieces of the Triforce. This is already not true. In the Legend of Zelda games, at least the Legend of Zelda games that I have played, collecting the pieces of the Triforce is not the goal, but is the fail state. Ganondorf is trying to collect the pieces of the Triforce. The reason for this is, if the Triforce is assembled, it grants one wish to a person. Such a nexus of power is going to cause a huge amount of drama, complete destabilization of the kingdom. This is why Link is trying to keep Zelda out of Ganondorf's hands. Zelda being the piece of the Triforce, being the Triforce of Wisdom, one of the 3 parts. Ganondorf has claimed the Triforce of Power, and Link has the Triforce of Courage. The only case in which Link actually does collect the piece of the Triforce, at least in the modern games, is in Wind Waker, where he actually can collects the pieces of one piece of the Triforce of Courage. Never in any Zelda game does he actually collect the piece of the Triforce. He always tries to steer clear of it. This just goes to show you how much Anita knows about gaming.
By drawing on familiar gaming icons and conventions that
Which normally would be considered something like plagiarism or piggybacking on another person's success.
many of us already associate with legendary quests and timeless adventures, Sword and Sorcery quietly asserts that women can fill the role of mythic hero as effectively as men can.
That's quite a leap of the imagination, but whatever makes you happy, Anita.
With the aid of a gorgeous and mesmerizing soundtrack, Sword and Sorcery's retro-inspired visuals paint a pleasantly abstract landscape players can navigate through the simple act of tapping or clicking. And the game tells a traditional yet emotionally resonant story, proving that you don't need technically impressive graphics to create a world worth exploring and a tale worth telling.
I'm fairly certain that most people are already aware of this. I don't think the throwback to the old days of graphics started with Sword and Sorcery, and I don't think it was any kind of important message from Sword and Sorcery. Most people have known for a very long time that graphics don't make the game. They help, but they don't make the game. It's the overall aesthetics that determine the visual appeal of a game. Good aesthetics needn't have good graphics.
In fact, the level of detail is so low in our pixelated protagonist, and our tendency to assume that heroes are male by default is so widely reinforced, that some players have made the mistake of assuming the Scythian is male, at least initially.
I don't understand how this is a positive female character trait. It can be a positive character trait that their gender isn't overly present, but the gender is actually a very important part of someone's identity. It is important to the Scythian that she is female. At least, that's what I assume. So, having her gender identity be completely nullified, be completely erased, while it may send out a nice message about equality, is probably not healthy for the Scythian herself. Most people who have these sort of gender confusion things, they don't feel very happy about it. And by gender confusion, I don't mean trans people, because trans people are very certain about their gender, but there are people who just don't understand their own gender, and those people tend to hurt. There was an investigation by a woman, Vincent, I think she was called. There was a feminist who had a naturally mannish build, who had a naturally mannish attitude, and she decided to go undercover as a man for a while. After spending, I think it was 6 months living as a man, she was hospitalized because the gender facade that she tried to put on was too taxing for her. What I'm trying to say here is positive female characters in video games, it helps if your character is actually female. Because the Scythian is more or less genderless. This is actually something that is fairly common in most of those male protagonists that she mentions, or at least in the classic video games where someone like Pac-Man is considered male, but isn't exactly gendered male. This actually also stretches to Link, who is not decidedly male. Sure, they have that gender, and they are male, but they aren't... It doesn't reinforce the fact that they are male. It doesn't constantly hammer home, this person is a male. Someone like Mario with the giant mustache does actually fit the bill a lot better as a decidedly male character, and someone like Bayonetta constantly struts around her femininity, so she is a decidedly female character. Samus Aran is another genderless character, except when she goes into a Zero suit, in which case she is very female. I would overall say that it would make a better positive female character if the character is decidedly female. But I suppose Anita is entitled to her own opinion about this.
Thankfully, the game doesn't resort to clear gendered signifiers like a pink outfit or a pretty bow in her hair.
Because, Lord, that would be the worst thing ever.
Nor does it present her gender as some kind of surprise twist like we see in the original Metroid.
Was that a terrible thing to do? No, really, was that a terrible thing to do? Was it terrible to take a very famous icon who had from the beginning been designed from the ground up to be female, and then revealing that she is actually female? I think for a lot of people this is a sort of jarring shock that says, hey, women can be heroes, women can be kick-ass. You start with a kick-ass character and then later introduce, oh, hang on, they're female. The surprise twist, this just comes across on me where she's trying to sort of demonize this whole reveal that the character is female. I didn't understand that. Samus Aran was kick-ass, she was designed from the ground up to be female, then she was suddenly revealed to be female. I think such a shock would force players to confront the fact that, hey, they played as a hero, and hey, that hero is a female. I don't see what's wrong with that.
In both visual design and writing, Sword and Sorcery is subtle about asserting the Scythian's gender. Though once you acquire the Megatome at the end of the game's first episode, you're presented with the thoughts of other characters who refer to the Scythian using female pronouns. It's not just in the visual sense that the Scythian lacks clear definition. We know very little about her history and nothing about why she's undertaken the quest to defeat an ancient evil. While
So an empty character is good, apparently.
Games often give us images of heroes who are fated to defeat evil forces. It's rare for these heroes of myth to be women. Like many video game heroes, the Scythian is essentially a silent protagonist, a figure defined primarily by her actions, which makes her a blank slate for all players to project themselves onto.
This is very surprising from the mouth of someone who calls herself a feminist, or who pretends to be a feminist. Anita Sarkeesian is basically saying here that a positive female character, or that it is a positive thing that a female character is a blank slate for someone else to project themselves onto. For how much she's been crying about objectification in the Tropes vs. Women series, suddenly this is okay. This is just, she is an object. This is what Anita is saying. She is an object that the player molds into shape. She is the property and the product of the player, not of herself. She is not her own character. She is the player's character. She is appropriated by the player. How is this a positive female character after she's been decrying that objectification is a horrible thing?
But while we don't actually hear her speak to other characters, a bit of the Scythian's personality does come through as her thoughts serve as a kind of narration for the story.
So, is she a blank character or not? You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say that she's a blank character with no personality and then say, oh yeah, she actually does have personality because she does talk.
Her quest is referred to as a woeful errand from very early on, an important bit of foreshadowing that communicates that her task is not a happy one. But the grim nature of her errand doesn't overshadow the Scythian spirit or the tone of the game itself. The character's quirky, often humorous thoughts, along with the sense of wonder in the world, makes this journey magical, delightful, and melancholy all at once. Sword and Sorcery is broken up into a series of short sessions, most of which focus on the Scythian acquiring pieces of the Trigon. There are some simple, timing-based combat encounters, but the majority of time is spent exploring the world and solving simple puzzles that require players to pay attention to environmental details like trees, birds, and reflections in the surface of a pond. The game is primarily concerned not with combat and killing, but with the natural beauty of the world the Scythian is trying to protect.
Which is not exactly a unique thing, but I do agree that this can produce some very interesting gameplay, and that it can produce some very beautiful games. A game that I purchased quite a long while ago, it was in early access and I think it's released now, In Verbis Virtus, is a game that also revolves primarily around interacting with your environment and charting your way through an ancient temple. The game is overall very beautiful and I enjoy that. It's not even focused on combat, although you do have to survive and there are monsters that you need to evade. I do have to agree with her here that this can produce very interesting games, which is not to say that this is some kind of better game. It's an alternative. It's something that's beside another thing. We tend to think of things in a sort of vertical line. Certain things rank above other things. That's because to our personal preferences, they do rank higher or lower. But I prefer to think of these things in a horizontal line. A peaceful puzzle game that focuses around creative thought and around the beauty of the scenery, the beauty of the world around them, is similarly as good as a game that focuses more on killing. Something like Bayonetta, one of those trigger things. No. Twitch fighting games.
Using the mysterious power of the Song of Sorcery, players sometimes manipulate the environment in some really surprising ways, creating the feeling that this is a magical world where just about anything can happen. Okay, at this point, if you haven't finished the game yet, you should just go do that right now. Even if getting to the end involves a whole real-time moon cycle mechanic that might take you a couple of months to complete, Unless, of course, you reset the clock on your gaming device, or if you're able to find the special moon grotto location. But spoiler alert, we're about to talk about how the story ends, so you've been warned. Most video game heroes become more powerful as their quest progresses. This is one way in which Sword and Sorcery subverts expected gaming tropes. There's nothing in it for the Scythian. She doesn't gain more health or better gear over the course of the game. In fact, the quest takes a toll on her.
There's nothing in it for the Scythian. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't she fated to do this? Doesn't this fulfill her destiny? Because that is a form of self-fulfillment, or self-actualization. The Scythian wouldn't be doing this if there was nothing in it for her. Even indirectly, if she does it to protect other people, then that is something that's her incentive to do this. I don't understand the entire game, and I don't claim to understand the entire game, but the impression that I'm getting is that the world is going to end unless she does this. I think it was Anita that said somewhere earlier that she's destined to defeat a great evil. Well, that's her incentive. What's in it for her is the safety of the world around her. Safety from this ancient evil. She can't just claim that there's nothing in it for her. Even if it's not utterly recognizable, there's still something in it for her.
She starts the game with 5 units of health, but loses 1 each time she wins a boss fight, decreasing her overall maximum health as her adventure progresses. This game is not about leveling up or becoming more powerful, and Sword and Sorcery ends with the Scythian doing something Link never has. To rid the world of an ancient evil, the brave hero sacrifices herself.
Let me stop you right there, Anita, because from what I recall of the Ocarina of Time, this is either partially or completely incorrect. You say that Link has never sacrificed himself in order to rid the world of a great evil, yet at the end of Ocarina of Time, when Zelda regains the Ocarina of Time from Link, she sends him back in time and then proceeds to erase his entire timeline. She erases all the events from Ocarina of Time to make sure that the evil never happened. This kind of erasure is still a sacrifice. He died in order to bring Hyrule back to its former peaceful glory. That is a sacrifice. Well, technically he didn't sacrifice himself. It was Zelda that sacrificed him with his consent. Otherwise he wouldn't have handed over the Ocarina of Time. So when she says that Link has never sacrificed himself, she can stuff it because that's wrong. Again.
Unlike the deaths of so many female characters in games which serve the purpose of fueling the development of male characters, the Scythian...
Or rather, of the story in general, not the male character.
Scythian's death is tragic because her life had intrinsic value. We projected ourselves onto her and...
Her life had intrinsic value. Oh, that's interesting. Because this intrinsic value is never given to male characters.
...experienced the world through her. In the game's final moments, we see the people of the region pay their respects to the Scythian, and we mourn her death along with them. She didn't just exist in relation to another character. She wasn't just somebody's wife or sister or daughter, but rather she existed as an individual and as a hero. The game's ending suggests that the Scythian will not be forgotten by the other characters, and the visuals and music work together to elicit a complex assortment of emotions, a sense of celebration of the Scythian's courage, and a sense of grief at her death. While the necessity of the Scythian sacrifice is worked into Sword and Sorcery's story from the beginning, and lends this particular game an emotional weight its quest might otherwise lack, we certainly don't want all female heroes to be tragic ones. But we do need more women-centric stories of all kinds.
That is subjective.
When archetypal fantasy heroes in games are overwhelmingly portrayed as men, it reinforces the idea that men's experiences are universal, and that women's experiences are gendered.
This is a very odd statement. Men's experiences are universal and women's experiences are gender. What? No, seriously, what is she trying to say with this? Is she trying to say that every single female hero is entirely... that every single story featuring a female hero is entirely based around their gender? Because that is an insult.
That women should be able to empathize with male characters, but that men needn't be able to identify with women's stories.
In most of the cases that she talks about where a woman is basically portrayed as someone who belongs to another man, well, in her words, that's someone like that you have a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a girlfriend, a wife, that kind of stuff. It specifically plays on the empathy that a male has for a female. It specifically plays on that part. Think about that, Anita.
Sword and Sorcery gives us a female protagonist and encourages us to see her as a hero first and foremost, one who also just happens to be a woman.
Which is also the case with Samus Aran, which is also the case with Zelda, which is also the case with Faith. What's the case where, was it Faith? Mirror's Edge? I think her name was Faith. It's not the case with Bayonetta, because Bayonetta very strongly reinforces the fact that she's female. And actually, Bayonetta brings hero and female on the same level in her character design. Whereas the Scythian is foremost a hero and then a woman, Bayonetta is a hero and a woman at the same time. Oh, that was the end of the video. Anyway, that was my commentary on it. The thing is, I find myself agreeing with a lot of the gameplay design points, because Sword and Sorcery does look like an interesting game with interesting writing, interesting gameplay design, interesting environment design, great art. But basically, every time she talks about the greater picture of gaming, just gaming industry as a whole, gaming industry, well, just in the general sense of gaming and gender in gaming, she gets it wrong on almost every occasion. And whenever some kind of knowledge is expected of her, like her statements about the Legend of Zelda series, it's usually wrong. Her statement about how the Triforce is collecting the pieces of the Triforce is a recurring theme in the Legend of Zelda games, is plain wrong. It is not very consequential, but it is still wrong. The other statement that she made, where she made the accusation that Link never sacrificed himself, is decidedly wrong, and is more importantly wrong, because it means that she either doesn't know about Ocarina of Time and is just making broad statements about the entire Legend of Zelda series without even playing every game, or she completely discredits this certain instance of Link sacrificing himself or getting erased just to fit her narrative. For me, it's very disturbing that this woman is given so much attention when she shows a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge about the medium. Such a little throwaway comment like collecting the pieces of the Triforce, okay, that's somewhat understandable, because it's not a very integral part. Overall, the big spiel of the Legend of Zelda games is primarily Link fighting Ganondorf with the aid of Zelda. It's not... The Triforce is actually a very small component of the Legend of Zelda. It's primarily the thing that motivates Ganondorf's movements. It's primarily the things that gives Ganondorf power. But quite frankly, if she's going to describe herself as a gamer or some kind of game expert or the pop culture critic, as she calls herself, then I do expect her to know what she's talking about. In any of the Legend of Zelda games that I've played, the only part where you collect pieces of the Triforce is that very annoying quest in the Wind Waker, where you have to collect all the pieces of the Triforce of Courage in order to reassemble it and grant it to Link. in pretty much all of the other games, you have to try and stop the Triforce from being united, because otherwise Ganondorf is going to get a wish. This was actually one of the themes in the Wind Waker as well, because ultimately, when the Wind Waker was... No, not the Wind Waker. When the Triforce was assembled, it caused a moment of... it caused another moment of chaos, of almost a fail state, until the king stepped in and claimed the Triforce. If Ganondorf had been the first to claim the Triforce, then it wouldn't have been a happy ending. I'm rambling. Anyway, the Triforce has never been an integral part of most of the Legend of Zelda games. The fact that she makes a statement just shows that she doesn't actually know gaming. The fact that she states that Link never made a sacrifice, never sacrificed himself in order to save the world, is also wrong. Technically, it was Zelda sacrificing him, but he knew what he was doing. He knew the sacrifice he was making. In other words, coupled with the blocked ratings and the blocked comments, it's once again Anita lying to everyone. I do have to say that this video was a vast improvement because she was primarily reviewing the game. But the moment she talks about the Scythian as something integral to the whole gender in gaming debate, everything starts going to hell again. And it returns to the same shoddy, my opinion is the truth kind of argument that we've seen from her up until now. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and maybe I will see you again sometime.